Caldwell, Director of Policy, Concerned Veterans for America.
Thank you all, and welcome to Concerned Veterans for America's Defend and Reform Town Hall with Senator Ted Cruz. This is the third town hall we've done this week with Senator Cruz, and I just got to say that I've loved being in Texas this last week. I've remarked to our Texas team that I wish our headquarters was out in Texas because I'm getting a little tired of the D.C. weather and the D.C. Beltway. This is the real America. Of course, Texas, as such a long service of sending Americans to serve in the armed services, and so many of the Marines I served with were from Texas, including some of the best, and I'm going to actually call some out here in a bit. But again, thank you for coming out. I want to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, so could you please stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please take your seats. I'm going to get in trouble. I don't know the Texas pledge, but go ahead and lead, ma'am. Well, I learned something new today. Thank you so much. So as I said earlier, my name is Dan Caldwell. I'm the Director of Policy for Concerned Veterans for America. I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and a veteran of the Iraq War. So with that, how many Marines do we have here today? Parents count, so this is good. So in a lot of states, you can't put too many Marines in the same room together in the same place because there's a threat of insurrection and general disorder, but that's not the case in Texas. How many soldiers we have here today? Fantastic. My wife served in the United States Army. How many airmen? Sailors? Coast Guardmen? Well, thank you all for your service, and thank you for being here today. So many of you are familiar with Concerned Veterans for America. I see a lot of great volunteers here today. But for those of you who don't know, Concerned Veterans for America is a veterans advocacy organization whose mission it is to preserve the freedom and prosperity that we fought and sacrificed for while in uniform. We're primarily focused on reforming and fixing the VA, reforming defense spending, and mobilizing and educating veterans across the country to serve as advocates for the policies we mentioned before in their communities. We have been in Texas since 2014. We have a very strong Texas chapter. Could our Texas staff please stand up? Where's Russ and Ben? Here's Ben Rangel. Ben Rangel is a fellow Marine Corps veteran, also served in Iraq. I think James Booker, who's another one of our staffers, still outside helping to get people in. But if you want to get involved with us, please hook up with them after the event. We're going to send out some emails to all of you that registered with some information about some great ways to get involved, some trainings, some advocacy events. We have a lot of important stuff that we're working on in Washington, D.C., and you also have some important stuff happening at the state level with your upcoming special session. So please, please, please get involved with us. Our grassroots are the key to our success as an organization. Today is a continuation of a series of events that we've been doing since 2012 with policy leaders from both parties. I need to go over some ground rules for how today is going to go. Understand there's a lot of passion around a lot of important issues today, but we need to remain civil and respectful. We have some families in the room. We have a lot of important issues to discuss, but we can't talk over each other. We can't shut down the event, and we need to make sure that only one person is speaking at a time. Look, I was in the Marine Corps Infantry. I'm bilingual. I speak English and profanity. I spent 4 years of my life getting yelled at or yelling at other people. I can personally take it, but we aren't going to do that here tonight. So if you interrupt or you disrupt the event in any way, you will be asked to leave. So please remain civil and respectful. We've collected question cards from everybody. We're going to try and get to as many questions as possible, but if we don't get to your question, we're going to hand it over to Senator Cruz's staff so they can get and answer the question you had. And they will get back to you. They'll make sure you get a response. Unfortunately, we don't have the room all day, so we can't get to all the questions. As you can see, we got quite a few here. before I introduce the senator, I want to thank some people for helping make these events happen. And we've had a lot of staff come across the country to help put these events together, so I want to start with them. First and foremost, I recognized our Texas team earlier. They've been traveling across the state with us. They did a lot of advanced work here. They're instrumental in putting these together. I also want to thank Houston PD and our security staff from the hotel that we brought out from CVA. They're here to help keep us safe, and we always appreciate their service as well. I want to thank Senator Ted Cruz's staff for being great partners in helping to put these on. I want to thank our excellent events team. They've been helping to check people in. Our comms team that's helped coordinate the press. They're a pleasure to work with. Make sure you follow us on social media as well to get updates on what we're doing. And I also want to just take a personal moment and recognize somebody who's here who's actually pretty special to me. In the crowd here, and he's going to probably, I can see him getting angry because he knows what I'm going to do, is one of my former platoon sergeants, Staff Sergeant Martinez right there. Staff Sergeant Martinez did 3 deployments to Iraq, 2 deployments overseas on what they call float, Marine Expeditionary Unit, probably some of you have done that, including 1 year-long one that got extended because of the Iraq surge. So he spent a lot of time away from home, he's been overseas, he's been in combat, and it's guys like him that have really bared the burden of the war on terror over the past few years. He also works for a fantastic organization called Next Op at the Combined Arms Center. They do a lot of great work for veterans. In fact, Senator Cruz was there yesterday. I'd encourage you to look them up. And if you need any services, to please hook up with them. They're very helpful. Staff Sergeant Martinez was a great leader, somebody who mentored me. And I would not have had such a great Marine Corps experience without serving with NCOs like him. So without further ado, I want to introduce Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz has been somebody who we've worked with a lot in Washington, D.C. on some very important issues, in particular reforming and fixing the VA. He's been somebody who's been willing to give us honest feedback and whose staff has always been willing to get back to us and engage with us on these issues. And we're very happy to have hosted him all this week at these events. And he's been somebody who's been willing to really step in the thick of it and answer a lot of tough questions. And I have to say that's something I really respect. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Senator Ted Cruz to the stage. Thank you, Senator.
Well, Dan, let me say welcome to my hometown. And I was particularly happy to hear you announce just a few minutes ago that CVA is moving to Texas. And I will tell you, we actually had, minutes ago, you may not have realized, a naturalization ceremony. Because once you've said the pledge to the Texas flag, you are an honorary Texan.
Well,
so welcome.
I appreciate that, Senator. Do you think you could help us get a subsidy to move out here?
You know, the subsidy is freedom.
There you go.
And we have a full helping of it.
Well, we don't support that, but a lot of states do that. I just wanted to inquire. But thank you again for joining us today, Senator. Again, this is our 3rd town hall. Just like at all the other ones, we've had some veterans that have approached us that are having some issues with Department of Veterans Affairs and other federal agencies. And what I tell those veterans when they come to me at this event and others is that you should contact your local senator or your national senator and your local congressman's office because they have services that can help you resolve these problems. Can you tell the audience about some of these services you provide and how to get in touch with you?
Yeah, Dan, I'm happy to. That's actually a big part of doing the job that I have is working to help each of you. You know, as you know, dealing with the federal government can be maddening. It can be frustrating. It's complicated. It's Byzantine. It sometimes makes no sense whatsoever. We have an extensive team on our staff whose sole job is to work with constituents, to help you navigate through the bureaucracy of the federal government. We can't necessarily solve every problem, but the people on the team have been doing it a long, long time, have a ton of expertise. Actually, one of the very first things I did when I was elected back in 2012 is I picked up the phone and called my predecessor, Kay Bailey Hutchison, and I said, Kay, listen, you've got an incredible team that she had built over the decades that had been helping constituents, that had that expertise. I said, please convey to the members of your team that they have a home, we want to talk to them, and we kept a lot of that team, The woman who leads our constituent service team has been serving in the Senate for 30 years and so has a lot of experience. I want to introduce you guys to a couple of folks. In the back is Jessica Hart, who leads our Houston office. And then over here on the side is Grant Murray, who's the deputy director of our Houston office. And both of them, they work for you. Their jobs are to help you, to be responsive to you. If you want to reach them, the easiest way to do it is our website is cruz.senate.gov. You can get the phone number to the Houston office, the address to the Houston office. If you're having an issue with the VA, if you're having an issue with another part of the federal government that you need some help, give them a call. They in particular like it calls at 2 and 3 in the morning, so that just is a preference on their part. But give them a call and we'll do everything we can to help.
Well, thank you, Senator. Again, I encourage you, if you're having issues with any of these agencies, please use the Senator's office. It's nonpartisan. They don't check your political affiliation at the door. And I can say that as a former caseworker myself, is at the very least they can get you more information. So, Senator, I want to kind of start our policy discussion at a 30,000-foot view. The Department of Veterans Affairs, since its inception in the 1920s, has been locked in what we've called the cycle of reform and failures. We'll have a major scandal, we have some reform, things get marginally better, they get really good. But then things revert back to the way they were, and there's another big scandal, and the cycle repeats itself and has for nearly 100 years now. Why do we keep hearing about these problems at the VA? Why are these continued scandals? Is it a structural issue? What is driving it?
Well, Dan, thank you. It's a great question. Let me say at the outset that how grateful I am to the terrific work Concerned Veterans of America do. You guys work incredibly hard organizing people on the ground across the country, and you do terrific work in Washington as an advocacy group, advocating for vets, advocating for better service, advocating for more responsiveness, and it's been, the impact you make is really significant. This question is one that you get a lot. People are understandably frustrated with the VA. Now, the VA has a lot of wonderful professionals. Many of them are veterans themselves. It has a lot of men and women who passionately care about the mission they have of providing for and caring for our vets. At the same time, the VA is a gigantic government bureaucracy. It is larger than the United States Navy. And government bureaucracies, by their nature, are inefficient, are often unresponsive, are cumbersome. And that's been exacerbated in the VA in recent years, where we all have seen the scandals that broke out as we had VA facilities keeping bogus books, phantom and fake books, denying veterans care, denying them the care that they had earned, that they had deserved. And in some cases, denying vets life-saving care that was desperately needed. And in my view, there are really two significant reforms that need to happen. Number one, we need substantially more accountability. Accountability within the VA. Like any government institution, and the VA is no exception, it is exceptionally difficult for there to be consequences for bad behavior. And that's one of the things I've been helping lead the effort in the Senate, is to provide more accountability. So if we have an employee who has broken the criminal laws, they should be prosecuted. And if we have an employee who is wrongfully denied care contrary to law, they should be disciplined, or if the facts merit it, terminated. We've seen some progress in expanding accountability in the VA, and actually CVA has been very active in pushing for that, but we need to do more to make sure there's accountability up and down the line. But the second piece, and this is the broader structural reform, is that we need much more choice in the VA. I am a strong believer that veterans, every veteran, you ought to be able to choose your own doctor. So if you want to go to the VA, if you think the VA is where you're going to get the best service, that is your right. You have bled for it, you have earned it, and we need to protect that right. But if, on the other hand, you want to see the local doctor down the street, the local cardiologist, you ought to be able to have that right too. You ought to be able to have the option to say, where do I think I can get the best care? And the power of that, we have right now the existing choice program. I'm glad it's there. It was started as a pilot program. It is narrowly circumscribed. One of the things we've been talking about at these town halls, we've done them up in Dallas and Austin, is how to improve the choice program. There needs to be substantial improvements. I suspect we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But my objective is to continue expanding it until we have full and robust choice. And the biggest advantage of that is the impact of that is to improve the delivery of service and the quality of care within the VA so that every veteran can get quality health care which you've earned and you deserve.
Well, thank you for that, Senator. I think that we at CVA agree on those key points. That's why the key reforms for us have been more accountability and more choice. We have a new president and we have a new VA secretary. They're 6 months in, but one of the president's top priority during the campaign was reforming, fixing the VA. How do you think they've done so far? Are you hopeful, are you optimistic, or do you still have some concerns?
I am hopeful and optimistic, but time will tell. We're going to have to see what the performance is, and we're going to have to assess it, and ultimately, it's going to be the men and women here that are dealing with the VA that are seeing, is reform taking hold, is it changing? I am encouraged that the President campaigned on reforming the VA, campaigned on expanding choice. I'm encouraged that the Secretary of the VA, who I've sat down with multiple times, has front and center placed these as important priorities. I'm also encouraged that in the President's new budget, there's a significant expansion in the funding for choice. Roughly $3 billion of additional funds are allocated to expand veterans' choice. I think that is a good and positive development. But at the same time, the proof will be in the pudding. We need to see real change in implementation. I think 6 months in, it's too early to tell what's going to happen. I think we'll be in a better position to judge a year from now, 2 years from now, where I hope when we're doing another one of these town halls, people will be able to say, you know what, I've seen a real change in the responsiveness. I've seen a real change in the wait times. I've seen a real change in the quality of care. If those are the reports we're getting from vets in the field, then that will be a success. And if they're not, then we're going to have to keep at it until we get it right.
Absolutely. Now, Senator, you actually just recently introduced a bill to help the VA with information technology, and this is a unique problem within the VA that a lot of people, I don't think, realize really helped drive the waitlist scandal over the past few years, is their inability to really manage their information technology systems. Can you tell us about your new bill?
Well, sure. It's legislation I introduced last week, and it was to create a chief information officer at the VA, a senior executive service position in charge of all IT, in charge of running IT and in charge of modernization. Yet, you know, most companies in the private sector, I mean, just about any company of any size is going to have a CIO in charge of that. IT is central, and yet the VA doesn't have that. And it's had a really sad record when it comes to IT. It has been, you have a system that can't talk to itself, whose records are unreliable, and there are a couple of things that flow from that. If we have a strong CIO, if we have strong reform in IT, then one of the areas of innovation is real-time locating services in healthcare. If you look at private hospitals, we're seeing this more and more with the ability to locate medical equipment, the ability to locate medicines and medical devices, to know where they are real-time, to make sure, for example, they're sterilized. A lot of VA facilities have had problems with equipment that hasn't been sterilized, that isn't up to date, and it's because they don't have the IT services to know what has happened to that particular piece of equipment. We need to modernize that. The VA has tried, but it's had a really poor record so far of getting that done. Another area, Dan, you referenced was the waiting scandal, where if we had a really robust and effective IT system where you had a record of when an individual calls in and requests service and when they get service, where you can't game the system, you can't keep fake books because the IT records are right there and it becomes evidence that this veteran called in and it's now 20, 30, 40, 50 days later and they still haven't received services. Having robust IT, I think, helps improve the responsiveness and have accountability within the VA.
And that was a recommendation of the recent Commission on Care, something that Secretary Shulkin has identified, and a lot of people who've done independent assessments of the VA. So this is a bill that CVA is supporting. Normally you should be suspicious when you're talking about creating new positions, but this is a position the VA does need. As somebody who used to be an advisor to us who now works at the VA used to say, is that a hospital system can't buy technology like the Department of Education. So we applaud your bill, and we hope to see it move forward. Before we get to audience questions, I want to kind of pivot to the issue of defense. You serve on the Senate Armed Services Committee. You just wrapped up the markup of the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the bill that sets defense policy for the next fiscal year and also sets spending levels. You've also been somebody who's spoken out a lot about the need to kind of reduce waste and inefficiency within the Department of Defense. So kind of a two-part question. First, what do you think of this National Defense Authorization Act, and do you think it is putting the DoD on the right path to better spend our tax dollars and be more efficient?
Well, I am very glad that last week we voted out the National Defense Authorization Act. You know, the Senate Armed Services Committee that I've been on now 5 years is one of the few parts of the Senate that actually works. You know, in this time of deep partisan division, of Republicans and Democrats at each other's throats all day long, the Senate Armed Services Committee is one of the few areas where you have Republicans and Democrats working together cooperatively to ensure that we're in a position to strengthen our military. And, you know, one of the most disturbing things I think over the last 8 years has been the weakening of our military readiness. The impacts of sequestration, the impacts of the Budget Control Act have resulted in putting dramatic pressure on our military. We've seen substantial reductions in troop strength. We've seen substantial reduction in readiness, in training and equipment. Modernization has been put on the back burner, if not removed altogether. And it's dangerous. And I do think there is a growing agreement that we need to do substantially more to rebuild our military. And I think the NDAA that we voted out last week, it authorizes funding for the Defense Department at $700 billion. That is about a $100 billion increase from where we are now. That is a big, big deal, and it is responsive to the concerns we've heard from our commanders over and over and over again, that as the world gets more dangerous, our ability to defend ourselves has been seriously compromised. Now, on the question of waste and fraud and accountability, that's a serious question in the DoD. And one of the issues I've been pressing from the beginning of my time in the Senate is auditing the Pentagon. It is amazing that an institution, a massive institution like the Pentagon, they don't have an audit. You know, if you were running a car wash here in Houston, you'd be in trouble if you couldn't audit the car wash. And yet, spending hundreds of billions of dollars, they can't tell you where the money's going. They can't tell you. It has not been auditable. One of the very first bills I introduced in the Senate was a bill to audit the Pentagon. That has been an issue I've been pressing for 5 years. I will say I'm encouraged, you know, Secretary Mattis, the new Defense Secretary, someone who is a legendary warfighter. In fact, I have to tell a joke I read online about General Mattis. It said, General Mattis has a bearskin rug. Bear's not dead, he's just too scared to move. You know, Secretary Mattis is a serious leader, and I think he has made accountability and waste and fraud and abuse and combating it a priority, and the Pentagon is reporting this fall they expect to be audit ready. That's a big deal. If they can deliver on that, that is a big deal, and I hope we will see very soon a reliable, verified audit so that we can find out where money's being spent, because every dollar wasted is a dollar that's not going to readiness, that's not going to our troops, that's not going to modernization. And so rebuilding the military consists both of devoting adequate resources, but also stopping the waste in the military so that those dollars can go where they need to go.
Well, we've also been a longtime supporter of the Audit the Pentagon Act. It was one of the, actually for CVA, one of the first pieces of legislation we actively supported. So I'm glad to see that you're still looking for that and that the DoD is hopefully moving in the right direction. So now we're going to pivot to audience questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call out a name based on the question cards I've received, and then Jim over here with the mic is going to come to you, and if you could please step up to the mic. If you need some assistance, we can help you out. If you just ask the question to the senator, please, one question at a time. We're going to try to get through as many questions as possible. And again, if we don't get to your question, the remaining questions will go to the senator's staff. So I'm going to start off with a question from Andrew. Where's Andrew? Andrew.
Senator, first, thank you for always putting veterans first throughout your time in the Senate and on your campaign.
Thank you, Andrew.
So my question is this. Prior to the signing of the current VA Accountability Act that the President just signed,
Right.
What took place that got us so far that we would need something like this to actually care for our veterans and hold the VA accountable and their employees accountable?
So let me ask you, Andrew, are you a veteran yourself?
Yes.
What branch?
United States Army. I served for 8 years, and I served multiple tours of duty overseas.
Well, Andrew, let me say thank you for your service. And to every one of you here who are veterans, I want to say thank you for standing up and sacrificing and stepping forward to risk everything for our country. We are grateful, and that's really one of the central purposes of these town halls, is to have the opportunity to say thank you. You know, you asked, how did we get where we are with the VA? Some of it is inherent in the nature of a government bureaucracy, and it's the reason why I focus so much on choice, because I'm trying to look to structural solutions that will change the incentives within a system. And I am a passionate believer in competition, that competition works, that competition improves quality. So for example, you know, all of us, think of the U.S. Post Office. And what happened to quality when FedEx and UPS began competing vigorously with the Post Office? Suddenly we started seeing a lot better quality, a lot better service from the Post Office, because they no longer had a monopoly, they had real competition. And so if they didn't do their job, they'd lose their customers to their competitors. You know, another example of that we saw, a lot of us are old enough to remember cars in the 1970s, cars in the 1980s, American cars, where quality wasn't what it should be. The quality really had gone down, they guzzled a lot of gas, they broke down too much. And we remember when Japanese cars started being sold. And that was a big deal. That caused a lot of people to be very, very upset about the onslaught of Japanese cars. But the impact, as Japanese cars came in, that competition, and people were freaking out that the American car industry is going to go away, dramatically improved the quality of American cars. We saw in the face of competition, American car companies going back saying, okay, we got to produce a better car, we got to produce a more reliable car, we got to produce a car that Americans want to buy, or we're going to lose our customers. Now, focus on the VA. One of the fundamental causes of the challenges there is that many of their customers, many of their patients, are captive. They don't have another alternative. And so the power of expanding choice is it gives you, the veteran, you, the patient, power. So if you show up and you're told, okay, for this treatment, you're going to have a waiting list of 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, you know what? If you have choice, you can say, heck with that, I'm going somewhere else. And so you don't actually need Washington dictating, okay, don't give this lousy waiting period, because empowering customers gives the power of competition to improve the system. I think that's the only thing structurally that will change the incentives, is when veterans have the power of choice themselves.
Thank you, Senator. Next question is from Megan.
Where's that $2 billion to cover that choice coming from?
There's Megan.
You talk about the wait times. I actually dealt with the wait times. I needed to see a specialist at the VA hospital, and it took 3 months for me to get in to see a primary care doctor just to get my appointment. So I show up to my appointment at 7:30 for what I thought was an 8 o'clock appointment. At 4:30 in the afternoon, they sent me home. They did not see me because I was not there early enough. 3 months later, I went in again and got there at 5:30 in the morning and was able to see a doctor at 2 o'clock. They said I needed to see a neurologist. 26 months later was my neurologist appointment. Then I had to do all my testing. I am still 8 months away from getting my results from that testing. Frankly, I have private medical insurance. I've been getting my care for 5 years privately, and if I hadn't, I would not be alive today. Now, I'm fortunate that I have that private medical insurance, but what are you going to do to address the backlog for the people who don't?
Well, ma'am, thank you for that question. And let me say also, thank you for your service. I'm sorry that you have dealt with that frustrating and maddening bureaucracy. I understand how frustrating that is. It's wrong. That should not be happening. And we have got to change it. You know, one of the keys to changing it, I believe, is expanding. So the existing choice program is a narrow pilot program. So it has all sorts of restrictions. For example, has a 40-mile restriction that you're only eligible if you don't have a VA facility within 40 miles of where you are. Or alternatively, if you're waiting more than 30 days for an appointment. So one of the areas to improve, and actually one of the things, so in addition to these town halls, we've been doing roundtables with veterans leaders in communities across Texas. A lot of the discussion of the roundtables, I've been trying to really listen and solicit ideas for, okay, how do we expand and improve choice? And I view the existing program like the camel's nose under the tent. That it's starting the process, and my objective is gradually expand and expand and expand it until suddenly the whole camel's in the tent. That one of the areas to improve it is shrinking that 40-mile radius, is shrinking the eligibility time. You know, another area of problem, and it's a consistent area of problem, is that the reimbursement rates and the timeliness of reimbursement to private providers has been really shoddy. And so when you talk to private providers that are caring for vets in the choice program, they say, listen, I care for a bunch of vets and then don't get paid or wait months and months and months before getting paid for my services. We need to have the payment systems prompt and responsive to encourage broader participation. Another area, and this is something that was raised in the roundtable we did of veterans leaders up in North Texas, was multiple visits. That if you get approved for a choice provider for a particular treatment and you go to that treatment and the physician says, okay, I need you to come back in 2 weeks for a follow-up, if you don't go and get pre-approved for that follow-up from the choice program, that follow-up typically isn't covered. And so you get vets that get hit with a bill for thousands of dollars for the follow-up after they got approved for the first one. That doesn't make any sense either. And all of that lack of choice is, I think, the biggest structural factor that leads to those frustrations you're dealing with. I'll note also we did a roundtable in Houston yesterday, and the point you made about private insurance, one of the areas that I've got my policy team looking at to improve is the interaction between the VA and private insurance. So several vets in the past week have shared with me frustrations about how they'd go for emergency treatment, and they had private insurance as well. And let's say the private insurance covered 80%, and they try to bill the VA for the remaining 20%, and the VA would say, no, 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 if you have private insurance, we're not paying anything. And they'd relay out how they'd have to go back, reverse the charge to their private insurance, so they don't pay the 80%, and then turn around and bill the VA 100%. Now that's just nuts. I don't understand how you're helping U.S. taxpayers by saying we refuse to pay 20%, we'll only pay 100%. You know, that's the kind of logic that only makes sense in government. All of those are areas we've got to improve, and my hope and objective is to improve the system so that you have the VA with the incentives to be responsive, not to have you sitting there from 5:30 in the morning to the middle of the afternoon, or even worse, sitting there all day and then sending you home, and not to have a 23-month delay, but instead to be responsive. And if they're not, for you to have the power and choice to say, okay, I'm going to go somewhere else where they are responsive. And I think either way, your health care needs are better met, and hopefully that competition is improving the quality of care in the VA as well.
Thank you. The next question is from James. James Robolowski.
Oh, okay. Senator, thank you very much for answering our questions.
Sure.
My problem with the VA, I currently have a primary care provider at the hospital, but I usually get all my labs done out here or out in Katy.
Yep.
However, when I go to the hospital, it seems for the last 5 years or so, it's been extremely overcrowded as far as people and the parking lots. There's been construction around the hospital. It's frankly just almost more difficult to go there to receive my care, then most of my appointments last. In fact, my doctors moved me primarily to phone conversations because it's just so much easier for the both of us. Would you support increasing facilities budgets for the VA to reduce some of those parking issues, as well as encouraging people to use their outpatient clinics closer to their homes?
Look, that's a very good question, and I think that's the sort of innovation we need to see in the VA. If you look at in the private sector, you're seeing the growth of more and more community care clinics and community care facilities rather than big centralized facilities. You're seeing more and more outpatient care, which often is what patients would prefer and can be more effective. I think the VA, we should expect them to be having similar levels of innovation. Now, my view is that shouldn't be dictated from Washington. It shouldn't be a bunch of politicians saying, okay, here's where you got to locate a clinic, here's where you need to locate a facility. I think dictating that from Washington doesn't work, but I think ensuring that we have a system where there is real competition is the best way to put leadership in the VA in a position of having to be responsive, having to be innovative, and saying, okay, I want to make sure to earn your business, to make you want to come here to the VA instead of somewhere else. So maybe one of the ways to do it is let's put a clinic out in Katy that may be able to meet your needs, where you don't have to drive in downtown, you don't have to wait nearly as long. I think that innovation will follow from expanding competition.
So, interesting story about parking. This is a huge issue across the country. At the Phoenix VA, which I had to deal with a lot in my previous job, had many issues as a hospital. Obviously, we saw the national scandal, but parking, a lack of parking was a huge issue. So they tried to get $4 million to build a parking garage. They couldn't get $4 million to build a parking garage, but they could get $23 million for solar panels, which actually reduced the number of parking spaces because they had to build the batteries, and they didn't turn the solar panels on for a year and a half, so any money they would have saved from them was wiped out. That's kind of the issue you see with the lack of flexibility, lack of governance within the system, that they can make better financial decisions like that. But it might seem like a minor issue to somebody who's not a veteran, who doesn't use the VA, but if you're a disabled veteran and you can't find parking at your local facility, that's a barrier to care. And it's an important question. I appreciate that. Next question's from Linda. Linda?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Senator Cruz. Appreciate your being here. My husband was a fully disabled vet from 2009 until he passed away about 15 months ago. No, 13 months ago. Our last experience with my husband's medical care at the VA, he had just gotten out of the hospital, of Methodist Hospital that the VA sent him to, that they have still not paid for, by the way, and I'm being sued.
Oh, wow.
His physician, his primary care that he had been under since 2001, refused to fill one of his cardiac prescriptions, and he was dead on the bathroom floor 6 days later. I'd like to know, one, why can't you look up the medical history of a doctor at the VA? Those records are hidden as though they're a senator or a congressperson. And I don't even remember what I wrote on my question because I've got so much emotions
I understand, man.
into
You were asking about what can we do about the excessive bonuses at the VA?
Yes, my husband was denied cardiac care completely in 2010, even though he had all of the symptoms of a heart attack, and prior to having a lobectomy, they recognized he had had several unreported heart attacks because the whole lower part of his heart was dead. But yet she refused to send him to a cardiologist. So I'd like to know, one, when are they going to stop bonusing these doctors and administrators for saving money and killing our vets?
Thanks so much for your question.
Well, Linda, thank you for your question, and thank you for your courage in coming here and sharing your story, sharing your husband's story. I'm sorry for the loss of your husband. I know the grief you're experiencing, and we're mourning with you. and I'm sorry the experience was so frustrating and maddening. That is exactly the opposite of how the VA should be behaving. Your husband stepped forward when his nation called.
5 times in Vietnam.
Wow. Well, thank you for each of the 5. And the freedoms we have today, the freedoms that we hold so precious and dear, we have because your husband was willing to risk everything to defend this nation. And that is true of the men and women gathered in this room and across the state and across the country. One of the things I'm going to ask Linda, if you would be interested, I'm going to ask Grant right there to visit with you because you said they're suing you and the VA is not being responsive. That's exactly the sort of scenario where our constituent service team, I'd love for Grant to visit with you and get our team to find out a little more what's going on in the VA and if we can help change how they're behaving. I can't promise we can fix it, but we do have people with a lot of experience who have had a lot of success helping shift how the government is behaving. You were right that seeing people get bonuses when they're denying care is exactly backwards. It's the wrong incentives. And to change that, I think the 2 most potent reforms are the one we've been talking about a lot. One, accountability, and having real accountability for decision making that's contrary to law, and 2, the power of choice, where, you know, when your husband came in and wanted cardiac care and was being denied, with a robust choice program, your husband would have been able to go to another cardiologist and say, listen, here are my symptoms, here's where what I'm struggling with, and get a second opinion, get someone else to give an assessment, and that may well have made a real difference in the healthcare outcome. My hope is that with by empowering veterans to have control over their own health care, we won't have other vets experiencing what your husband experienced, and we won't have other families experiencing the grief and agony that you've been going through. Thank you for his service, and thank you for yours as well.
So the next question is from Teresa. Teresa?
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry. Mental health has been an issue with our vets, and
Yes.
it's almost a direct correlation as far as homelessness.
Yes.
What are your solutions to combat the high rate of homelessness for our vets?
Well, Teresa, thank you for that question, and you're right, it is an enormously important question. You look at mental health issues, you look at homelessness, you look at suicides, where we've got 22 veteran suicides a day, and it's heartbreaking. You know, yesterday morning I had the opportunity to go out and visit Camp Hope here in Northwest Houston, which is a facility, if y'all are not familiar with it, it's a wonderful facility that cares for vets that are struggling with PTSD. And it's a residential facility. They have about 60 vets that are staying there on the campus. It's a Christian ministry that helps them work through the challenges, helps them work through their issues. And I spent a couple hours just sitting and visiting and hearing their stories of one veteran after another who, a number of them had been homeless, virtually all of them had significant drug or alcohol dependencies, had been enmeshed in very dangerous situations. A number of the veterans around the table had suicide attempts, and in several instances, multiple suicide attempts in the past. And it was heartbreaking, and I will say we as a society need to do a far better job of responding to the ravages of warfare, the ravages, the physical ravages, yes, but the mental and spiritual ravages of, you know, listening to these veterans yesterday morning express the guilt and self-doubt. I remember one individual who had put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger, and the bullet had grazed off and not killed him. And he described how one of the other vets at the camp had asked him, "What did your son ever do to make you so unhappy with him?" And he said he was very confused. His son was 6. And he said, "Why would you leave your son with the agony of not having a dad?" And he was describing, and he was tearing up as he was describing. He said, "I'd never thought of it from that perspective." And the impact of, you know, what they described that was so impactful was just being with other soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines and discovering that what they thought was their own private agony, there were others going through the very same thing. In fact, one of the therapies they described for me was dealing with emotions. And they described how the counselor had a group of vets in the room and asked them, do you trust me? And they said, yes. He said, okay, I want you to take these slips of paper and write down 5 secrets that you've never told anyone that you've done. And each of them did that, and they put them all in a bucket. And then they mixed them up. And they passed around, everyone took 5. And they said, read them out loud. They don't have your names on it, but just read them out loud. And so they'd read one out, and they'd say, all right, this is your secret that you're beating yourself up about, that you're guilty about it. How many other people here have experienced that same problem? And they said over and over again, it was powerful how 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 veterans would raise their hands and say, you know what, I'm experiencing the same thing. And they talked about the experience of looking around and discovering that their own suffering is not unique, but that there are others going through who are suffering through the same thing. We need far more effective directly addressing those issues, and often these mental health issues, as I said, are so interrelated with substance abuse. And, you know, I mean, I'll say that's an issue my family has struggled with. My sister died of a drug overdose. And it is an issue that families across Texas and across this country struggle with. It is part of why we need the VA to be more effective, more responsive. You know, one of the problems with mental health is if you go into a VA facility, and this is something actually several of these veterans described, you'd see people with trauma, someone that had a gunshot, someone that was severely physically wounded, and a number of VA facilities would kind of diminish, oh, you're just feeling depressed. That's not as big a deal as someone with a gunshot. And they were describing, well, gosh, you know, they started to think, well, maybe I'm just complaining too much and I need to go home. And they weren't getting the treatment they need. You know, when I was at Combined Arms, which is another facility here in Houston that brings together a number of wonderful veteran service agencies, all in one place, different groups, different nonprofits to work with vets, one of the things they were describing is they said, when they ask vets, okay, what do you need? What services do you need? And they said relatively few would actually select mental health, that they wouldn't self-identify as this is a challenge I'm struggling with. And so they were trying to figure out creative ways to get people to connect with the services they need. What they described, it was actually very interesting. They said, look, about half the vets they deal with are dealing with employment issues and struggles, either wanting a job or if they had a job, wanting a better job. And so a lot of the services are helping vets on the employment side, and there are few things as stressful as trying to find a job. So one of the things they said they found effective is they do stress days. Get the stress out if you're looking for a job. And they'd bring in massage therapists and, you know, just things to relax and deal with your stress. And vets would come in for that. They'd say, okay, yeah, I am stressed. And they'd start talking and suddenly reveal that there are mental health issues that they're struggling with and demons that they're battling with. And they could connect them then with therapists or counselors who could help them through it. I think part of dealing with mental health is being honest and direct in confronting it. And part of it is the overall structural reform that we've been talking about here today, about making the VA more responsive, by making it have to be competitive with vets being empowered to choose.
Thank you, Senator. With that, we're almost out of time. There's 2 points I'd like to make before I hand it over to Senator Cruz for some closing remarks. First is, again, I need to make another plea to please get involved with us at Concerned Veterans for America. We work with some other great partner organizations as well. We have out here in Texas an important special session coming up. At the federal level, we just passed a huge VA accountability bill that we just discussed. That could not have happened without grassroots volunteers, including many in the room here. We have a lot of great events that are hosted by people like Ben, Russ Durstein, James Booker, and others across the state and across the country. We feed you well, but we're going to ask you to put in some work to help advance good federal policy. Second point I'd like to make, and this is really kind of a personal point I have to say, is that I've been watching the news throughout these town halls and throughout the country and about what senators are doing on their recess. And I have to be honest, is there's a lot of elected officials from both parties that are frankly hiding from their constituents. And Senator Cruz is not one of them. And I think that is good for our republic. I think that's good for our democracy and a free and open exchange of ideas. And it's disappointing to me to frankly see a lot of senators, colleagues in both parties, and some of them, are overseas doing important work there, but not willing to engage the public. And Senator, thank you for doing these events. Thank you for not being afraid to answer questions. And with that, I'd like to kick it over to you for some closing remarks.
Well, I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank you for taking the time, and I want to thank, there are a few folks here who are vocal, who I take it are on a different side of the political aisle. And you know what? I want to thank you for coming as well, and I want to thank you. I was about to thank folks for being civil and respectful, and it's actually fairly striking that I appreciate the folks who came, who want to engage in civil and polite discourse. I am very happy to have a conversation on any topic, and I travel the state just about every day, talking with constituents and answering the questions from constituents. I appreciate your being here. If we're engaged, listen, these issues are personal. These issues are real. I respect your passion. I respect your passion if you agree with me, and I respect your passion if you disagree with me. A few days ago, on July 4th, I was down in McAllen on the border as part of their 4th of July parade. And, we had some protesters would come out. We had a lot of folks come out who were actually supporting me and waving signs. And, they had them on both sides. I mean, it was a little bit like, tastes great, less filling. I mean, they were kind of battling it out. But that's the great thing about democracy. The great thing about democracy is we all have a right to speak. We have a right to engage with each other. Now, no one has a right to silence others, to shout others down and silence others, but we have a right to engage, and I'll tell you this, I will always defend your right to speak. Now, I will say one of the things our friends in the media, there's a consistent pattern. And actually the McAllen 4th of July march was a good example. You had, at the central podium, you had, 100, 200 protesters. You had about 100, 200 people that were supporting me. They were there. Just about every media coverage focused on the 100, 200 protesters. There were thousands of people along the parade route cheering and defending our freedoms and defending our nation. That got no coverage at all. But if you get some people who sort of, there was a gentleman that wanted to wave a sign. I assume that every newspaper will now cover that sign. Nothing else happened here other than one guy with a sign. And I'll note that tends to happen when the sign being held up aligns with the political orientation of folks in the media. But I appreciate y'all's being here, and I'll tell you what, I look forward to continuing to engage in discussions and debates in understanding the issues that are front and center, that matter, and health care is an issue. This particular town hall we didn't discuss in any real depth Obamacare, the efforts to repeal Obamacare. I am intimately involved and passionate about it. I would encourage you, the last two that we did, both in Austin and in Dallas. We discussed it at length. If you want to see the discussion, you can go online and watch the whole discussion. So it didn't end up coming up in this questions. This was the only one that didn't. Thank you for your banner, ma'am. I'm happy to have that conversation. Ma'am, okay, so let me respond. And I reply to folks all over the state. I will say, by the way, when it comes to answering phones, that we answer thousands upon thousands upon thousands of phone calls.
Folks, please settle down.
Look, let's be politeful. Let's be politeful and respectful on both sides. Everyone. Civil discourse is a wonderful thing.
Sir, I'm not on your side, and I actually wanted to apologize real quick. Online, I called you a coward. I even had a hashtag, Cruz the Coward, and I'm a teacher, and I wanted to apologize. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. What do you teach?
I teach U.S. history and English.
Fantastic.
Can I tell you my favorite story?
Sure.
My favorite story in U.S. history, here we go. We just celebrated the 4th of July. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams wrote the Declaration of Independence together, right? Not that we didn't have parties, but we had completely different political spectrums, right? This is out of Robert Ellis's Founding Brothers. The book starts with a moment where
I'm just going to hold it.
The book starts in the moment where, in the 1790s, it almost all fell apart. I'm a teacher. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you go.
In 1790s,
that's all right. Let's listen to her.
It almost all fell apart, right?
It's good.
We almost didn't have a constitution. These two men who were at opposite sides of the spectrum sat down. They wrote the Declaration of Independence together. Now, they had a falling out. I don't know if you know this, but they had a falling out because of political ideas. A friend brought them together, and I know you know the story. Just act surprised when I tell you.
All right.
These two men who came back together, who thought they didn't have anything in common. They came back together. They rekindled their friendship. They died on the same day, on the 4th of July, 50 years to the day after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Thank you. I would love to see the VA audited. You and I have so much in common. People question your citizenship. I'm an anchor baby. Both my parents were immigrants. People would say that we're not American. I vote on different things that you. We both have 2 daughters. We have so much in common, and I think that if Americans realize we have more in common than we don't have in common, and you're right, that's not what the media finds sexy. What I would ask, your good friend Mike Lee, he meets with constituents once a month in a much more open way. There were a lot of people outside that didn't know because this wasn't posted on your Facebook. So they didn't know to snag a ticket. I was looking closely, so I grabbed a ticket. I would love to see you come out more. I learned so much more. I found so much more in common with you today, like about auditing. I didn't know that they don't audit the Pentagon. I get audited every year as a teacher with unfair tests. Better Work meets every month face to face, and once a month with veterans. So I wanted to thank you for coming out. You're not a coward. Thank you for coming out to speak with us.
Thank you, Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Gabby. And thank you, everyone, for being part of this conversation, which will continue. And it's a conversation we need to have about how to address the great challenges. And let me in particular emphasize something Gabby said, which is at the end of the day, you know, it's easy to focus on the differences. But all of us would like to see people's lives made better. All of us would like to see more opportunity for the next generations. We may disagree about what policies will accomplish those ends. But I do think there is a wonderful value in having civic discourse and seeing where we can come together and find common ground and actually accomplish shared objectives. That's one of the things in Texas. I will say Texans, there is a lot more basic common sense than there is in Washington. And I wish Washington could just have a lot more Texas common sense. Thank you guys for being here, and thank you to CBA for hosting.
Thank you, Senator. That was good.